Okay, so you've gathered a ton of info about schools and achievement this time. We're talking everything from like your first steps into a classroom to surviving college and even prepping for, that whole career thing.
Yeah, it's the full educational journey here. And as always, the mission is to dig in deep, find the hidden gems, the stuff that really matters about how we learn, what makes us tick when it comes to success, and how, well, school really shapes who we become.
And going through this, I got to say, I was surprised, like seriously surprised by some of this stuff. We're going to talk about how big of an impact early childhood experiences actually have. Like, it's way more than I thought. And also, why students in different countries end up with such wildly different levels of achievement. It's fascinating.
Totally. Let's start with how learning even happens these days. Your material highlights two big approaches you'll probably see or have already seen: constructivism and direct instruction.
Okay, so constructivism, I'm getting this vibe of like the learner, you being in the driver's seat, actively building your own understanding. And the teacher's more like a coach, right? Nudging you along, letting you explore and figure things out on your own. And there's a big focus on working with other students. You're basically constructing your own knowledge.
That's a perfect summary. Constructivism says just absorbing information passively isn't as powerful as actively trying to make sense of it. It's all about learning by doing, experimenting, and figuring things out with some guidance, of course.
Like imagine learning to code or play an instrument. You can read all the books in the world, but you really learn by, well, actually doing it, messing up, and figuring it out along the way. Now, direct instruction, this sounds much more teacher-centered, right? Very structured, clear expectations, all about squeezing the most learning out of every minute.
You got it. Direct instruction is all about efficiency. The teacher is leading the charge, presenting information in a clear and organized way, keeping everyone focused, and minimizing those distractions so that knowledge actually sinks in.
And I'm sensing a bit of a debate here, a clash of philosophies. The constructivism camp sometimes says that direct instruction can make students too passive, not encouraging them to think creatively or independently.
Exactly. The concern is that students might become robots just memorizing stuff instead of actually understanding and internalizing the knowledge.
And then the direct instruction folks often counter the constructivism can be, I don't know, maybe a bit too loosey-goosey, like not enough focus on specific content and maybe lacking a clear roadmap.
Yeah, that's the classic critique. But honestly, good teaching often blends the two. Many teachers use elements of both depending on what they're teaching and what their students need at that moment. Like, for foundational concepts or a specific skill, a more direct approach might be the way to go.
Right, building those blocks. Okay, let's switch gears a bit. We've got this whole topic of accountability in schools. Seems like there's been this push to measure everything to see how well schools and students are performing, especially with all the standardized testing.
The timeline is important here. You see a surge in standardized testing starting in the 90s, and it really ramps up with the No Child Left Behind Act, or NCLB, in 2002. That made it federal policy.
And CLB, right? And the arguments for all this testing, I mean, they sound good on paper, right? Improve student performance, make sure schools are teaching what's on the test, set those high expectations, and find the schools that need extra help. The hope was that test scores would go up everywhere, and we'd have a clear picture of how our schools were doing.
Makes sense on the surface, right? You want schools to be accountable. But NCLB got a lot of flack, too. One big concern was that a single standardized test doesn't tell the whole story. It doesn't capture creativity, problem-solving, motivation, or critical thinking.
Exactly. It's like judging a whole sports team based on one player's stats. And then there's the whole teaching to the test thing. Teachers felt pressure to teach to the test, even if it meant sacrificing a deeper understanding of the subject. And it seems like gifted students might have been overlooked in this push to bring everyone up to a basic level.
Another issue was that while NCLB wanted national standards, each state could define what proficient even meant on those tests. Like, a passing score for reading in Mississippi could be totally different from one in Massachusetts, so you don't really have comparable national standards.
Wow, that seems like a pretty big oversight. So then comes the Common Core State Standards Initiative, right? The idea was to create a more consistent, more challenging set of goals that would be used in many states.
The thinking was, if we want a fairer education system, we need to make sure students are learning the same essential things no matter where they live. But Common Core sparked its own controversy, too.
Yeah, definitely heard about that. Some folks thought it was the federal government stepping on states' toes, trying to source a one-size-fits-all approach that didn't account for, the unique needs of different schools and students.
That was a big debate, national standards versus local control.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, so Common Core had its ups and downs, and now we have the Every Student Succeeds Act, or SSC. That's the law of the land right now for education.
Right. ESAT replaces NCLB and gives states a lot more flexibility in how they do things. Annual testing is still a thing, but states have more say in how those test scores are used to evaluate schools. What's interesting is that ESA also says states have to consider non-academic stuff too, like student engagement or the overall school environment.
So it's not just about test scores anymore. That's a good thing, right? Recognizing that a good school is more than just good grades.
It raises the question of how do we really measure success in education? ESA acknowledges that test scores are just one piece of a very complex puzzle.
All right, let's zoom in on how schools approach different ages, starting with those little ones. We've got this idea of child-centered kindergarten, which sounds like a very warm and fuzzy place to be.
Child-centered kindergarten is all about the whole child. It's not just about academics, but also their social, emotional, and physical development. Activities are tailored to each kid's needs and interests, their individual learning style. It's about the learning process, not just the end product.
And play, lots of play, right? Experimenting, exploring, discovering, getting your hands dirty, that's how they learn best.
It goes back to constructivism. Active, hands-on learning is key for little kids to make sense of the world around them.
Then there's the Montessori approach, which has been gaining popularity. This one seems to give kids a lot of freedom to choose what they want to do in a very specific kind of classroom.
Right. Montessori is all about independence and self-directed learning in a structured environment. Kids pick from various activities, work at their own pace, and the teacher is more of a guide, stepping in when needed. The goal is to raise those self-motivated, problem-solving kids.
You know, it's interesting. A lot of successful folks, like the founders of Google, they credit their Montessori education with their success. And Jeff Bezos is investing in Montessori-inspired preschools now. That says something.
The focus on independence and cognitive skills early on is what makes Montessori unique. But some experts wonder if it sometimes misses out on social and emotional development. Maybe not enough direct interaction with the teacher. And some question if it limits those free-flowing creative activities, the imaginative play.
Yeah, it's a good point. There's definitely a balance to be struck there. And then there's developmentally appropriate practice, or DAP. This sounds like a middle ground, right?
DAP is all about meeting kids where they are developmentally, recognizing that each kid is different. It's about active learning, critical thinking, cooperation, and learning to self-regulate. It's about making learning fun and engaging, focusing on the journey itself.
And it looks like DAP actually works. Kids are less stressed, more motivated, they develop better social skills, better work habits, and their language and math skills even improve.
Research backs that up. Creating learning environments that are appropriate for a child's developmental stage really makes a difference.
Okay, let's talk about programs that help disadvantaged kids, like Head Start and the Perry Preschool Project. These seem crucial for creating a more level playing field.
Absolutely. Head Start is this big program for low-income families. It's not just education, but health, nutrition, the whole package. Studies have shown mixed results, but some link Head Start to better early math, reading, and vocabulary skills, especially for kids who start behind. And there's this fascinating finding that kids whose moms also went to Head Start do better later in life. So it can have a lasting impact, even across generations. But a challenge is that some of those early gains can fade as kids go through elementary school.
And the Perry Preschool Project, that one's shown some incredible long-term benefits, right?
Yeah, it wasn't Head Start, but it was a high-quality early intervention program. And the results are mind-blowing. Lower teen pregnancy, lower crime rates, higher graduation rates, better employment, home ownership, the whole 9 yards. It shows that investing in early childhood education can really pay off in the long run.
Incredible stuff. There's also a program mentioned in high-violence areas of Chicago. It sounds like it helped initially, but the long-term effects on behavior weren't as strong.
That's important to note. The Chicago program saw early improvements in behavior, executive function, things like planning and self-control, and academics. But long-term, those benefits mostly stuck around for executive function and grades, not so much behavior. It suggests that continued support is key for making those lasting changes.
And it all circles back to the debate about early childhood curriculum, that child-centered, constructivist approach versus a more academic, direct instruction approach.
The takeaway is the best programs often blend the two. Experts warn against pushing academics too hard, too early. It's about finding that balance between cognitive and social-emotional development. Both are important.
Okay, so kids move on to elementary school. Big shift. They're now school children. with new rules and expectations.
It's a new world for them, and sadly, research suggests that the feedback they get in those early years can be more negative than positive. And it's concerning that self-esteem can actually go down as kids go through elementary school.
Now, adolescence, middle school or junior high, this is a wild ride, right? So much going on all at once.
Definitely a roller coaster. Puberty, body image stuff, they start thinking more abstractly and logically. That's called formal operational thought. More socially aware, wanting more independence, but also more responsibility, especially with schoolwork. Schools get bigger, more impersonal, more teachers, more diverse classmates, and there's more emphasis on achievement and grades. And there's this thing called the top dog phenomenon. They go from being the oldest in elementary school to the youngest in middle school, and that can impact their self-confidence and even how they perceive their teachers.
It can't all be bad, though, right?
Yeah.
There's got to be some good stuff about this transition.
Absolutely. They feel more grown up, more choices and classes and friends, and they get exposed to new intellectual challenges, which can be exciting.
Okay, what makes a good middle school? It sounds like there's concern that they sometimes become like mini high schools, not really meeting the needs of this unique age group.
The Carnegie Foundation did this big evaluation of middle schools and found some serious issues. They were too big and impersonal, the curriculum didn't feel relevant to their lives, they didn't have strong relationships with adults at school, and they lacked access to things like healthcare and counseling. Their recommendations were to create smaller learning communities within the school, lower student-to-counselor ratios, get parents and the community more involved, make the curriculum more engaging and relevant, use team teaching, and focus on the kids' physical and mental health.
But it seems like a lot of those recommendations haven't been widely adopted, which is concerning.
That's the sad part. We know what young adolescents need, but many schools are still struggling to meet those needs.
And the concerns continue with high school, right? There are worries about whether high school actually prepares kids for college and the real world.
The data paints a worrying picture. A lot of high school grads aren't ready for college academically, and they're not prepared for the demands of today's jobs. Even the transition to high school can be tough. Schools get even bigger, more bureaucratic, less personal, and there's less connection with teachers. And sometimes the stuff they're learning just doesn't feel relevant to their lives.
But one bright spot in high school, extracurricular activities. They seem to be really good for kids.
Yeah, the research is pretty clear on this. Extracurriculars are linked to better grades, more engagement in school, lower dropout rates, higher chances of going to college, better self-esteem, and even less depression and substance abuse. And it seems like trying different things and really diving deep into one or two activities are both beneficial.
Now, what about high school dropout rates? I've heard they've been going down overall.
That's good news, but there are still gaps. Asian American students have the lowest dropout rates, while Latino students have the highest. The difference between boys and girls has shrunk, but boys still drop out a bit more. And dropout rates in low-income urban areas are alarmingly high. It's also important to remember that dropout rates can be calculated in different ways, looking at whether students graduate within 4 years or how many young adults haven't finished high school.
And there's so many reasons why kids drop out, from school issues to financial pressures to personal stuff. But having a strong relationship with parents seems to help a lot.
That's a big one. Supportive parents who are involved in their kids' education make a huge difference.
All right, college and adult education. It's clear that a college degree is valuable, and not just because you might earn more money.
Financially, it's a no-brainer. College grads earn way more over their lifetime, like $1 million more on average. They're also less likely to be unemployed and even tend to live longer.
But college students these days are dealing with a lot of stress.
Right. Yeah, stress and depression are on the rise among college students, and it seems to hit female students particularly hard.
So what makes college students happy? What helps them thrive?
It's the social stuff. Strong friendships, being outgoing, those close relationships, those seem to be the key ingredients for happiness in college.
And adult education is growing too. It's not just about getting that degree, it's a whole world of learning.
It's everything from basic literacy to community courses, college credits, job training, professional development, you name it. More adults are taking college courses, and women are the majority, especially in older age groups. It's because they have more free time, they need to update their skills, or they just enjoy learning. Of course, going back to school as an adult has its own set of challenges.
Now, educating kids with disabilities, this is an area where we've come a long way.
Absolutely. More kids are receiving special education services, and we're getting much better at understanding specific learning disabilities. These are things like trouble understanding or using language, spoken or written. And it's not because of other disabilities or their environment. Reading problems are super common, including dyslexia. Then there's dysgraphia, which affects handwriting, and dyscalculia, which impacts math.
So what causes these learning disabilities?
The exact causes are still a bit of a mystery, but research points to a few things. It's probably a mix of how different parts of the brain work together and subtle differences in brain structure and function. MRI scans, those brain scans, are helping researchers understand this better. And interventions usually focus on intensive instruction to help kids improve specific skills, like reading.
And ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, it seems like more kids are being diagnosed with ADHD these days.
Yeah, ADHD is marked by trouble paying attention, being hyperactive, and being impulsive. And it can affect how kids function and develop. It can look different in different kids. And that increase in diagnoses has led to a debate about whether we're overdiagnosing it or just getting better at recognizing it. The causes are probably a mix of genes, maybe brain damage before or after birth, even things like mom smoking or drinking or being stressed during pregnancy. Brain imaging shows some differences in brain development in kids with ADHD, especially in the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain that helps with attention and planning. There's also evidence that certain brain chemicals, called neurotransmitters like serotonin and dopamine, might be involved.
And what happens to kids with ADHD as they grow up? What challenges do they face?
Sadly, childhood ADHD is linked to a higher risk of dropping out, teen pregnancy, substance abuse, getting into trouble with the law, not doing well academically, and becoming parents young. And for many people, those ADHD symptoms can stick around into their teen years and adulthood.
So how do we treat ADHD? I know medication is common, but there are other options too, right?
Stimulant meds like Ritalin and Adderall are often prescribed, and they can help in the short term with attention and hyperactivity. But the long-term benefits aren't as clear. Then there's behavior management, which is about teaching kids ways to manage their symptoms and develop coping skills. Often, a combo of meds and behavior management works best. But it's important to acknowledge the concerns about overdiagnosis and using psychoactive drugs on kids. And, there are some alternative treatments showing some promise. Things like neurofeedback. That's where you train your brain to be more aware of its own activity, mindfulness training, and even exercise. Some studies show they can help with attention and ADHD symptoms, but we need more research to see how well they work long term and how they compare to or can be used with traditional treatments.
Okay, moving on to autism spectrum disorders, or ASD. It seems like how we diagnose these conditions has changed recently.
Yeah. The DSM-5, that's the big book of mental disorders, it lumped a bunch of conditions together under the ASD umbrella, like autistic disorder and Asperger's. Now, the severity of ASD is based on how much support someone needs in areas like social communication, restricted interests, and repetitive behaviors. This change has been controversial because some people feel it oversimplifies the huge diversity within the autism community, and we've seen more ASD diagnoses in recent years.
What do we know about what causes ASD?
Research strongly suggests it's related to how the brain develops and functions. There might be differences in brain structure and how different parts of the brain communicate, maybe because of variations in brain chemicals called neurotransmitters. Genes also seem to play a big role, with many different genes linked to a higher risk of ASD. But importantly, there's no scientific evidence that parenting causes autism.
Now, IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, that's the law that makes sure kids with disabilities get the education they deserve, right?
Right. IDEA says every child with a disability has the right to a free and appropriate public education, or FAPE. This means there's a process to evaluate kids and see if they need special ed services. Then there's the Individualized Education Program, or IEP, which is a tailored plan for each student's specific needs. And IDEA says kids with disabilities should be educated in the least restrictive environment, or LRE, meaning they should be with their non-disabled peers as much as possible. Inclusion, where kids with disabilities are in regular classrooms full-time, is becoming more common.
It sounds like IDEA has made a huge difference for kids with disabilities. But some people argue that full inclusion might not be the best for every single child.
That's an ongoing discussion. While inclusion offers great opportunities to socialize and learn with other kids, some experts think a more individualized approach might be better for some kids, maybe a mix of different learning environments.
Okay, last but not least, socioeconomic status and ethnicity. These factors can have a huge impact on a kid's experience in school.
It's a harsh reality. Kids from low-income families face a lot of obstacles. Their parents might not have a lot of education or strong reading skills. They might not have the money to buy books or take their kids on enriching trips. They might struggle with malnutrition, or they might live in unsafe neighborhoods. Research shows that growing up in poverty can affect both parents and children, and that prolonged poverty can harm a child's cognitive development.
And schools in poor neighborhoods often struggle too, right?
They do. Compared to wealthier schools, they have more kids struggling academically, lower graduation rates, lower college attendance, more inexperienced teachers, more emphasis on rote learning instead of deep understanding, fewer resources for English language learners, and often the buildings and facilities are in bad shape. Programs like the Child Parent Center program are trying to break this cycle, and there's Teach for America, which recruits recent college grads to teach in low-income schools.
And then there's ethnicity. This is a complicated issue that's closely linked to socioeconomic status.
Absolutely. In many big cities, schools are still pretty segregated, with a lot of African American and Latino students in one school and white and Asian American students in another. This often leads to underfunding and fewer opportunities for minority students. And we see disparities in academic programs, too. African American and Latino students are less likely to be in college prep courses and more likely to be in remedial or special ed classes, while Asian American students are often overrepresented in advanced math and science. And African American students are suspended more often. Poverty and underfunded schools play a big role, but we can't ignore discrimination, bias, and prejudice. It's also important to remember that every ethnic group is diverse, and there's a huge range of academic success within each group.
So what can schools do to improve relations between students from different backgrounds? How do we create a more inclusive environment?
There are some promising strategies. One is the jigsaw classroom, where students from different backgrounds work together on a project, each becoming an expert on one part. It promotes teamwork and shows them how much they need each other to succeed. Encouraging positive personal contact between students from different backgrounds is also key. Give them chances to share personal stories and get to know each other as individuals. Another strategy is perspective-taking activities. These help students understand the experiences and viewpoints of others, and schools need to work hard to reduce bias, use diverse images and inclusive materials, challenge stereotypes, and get parents from all backgrounds involved in the school community. Finally, the Comer School Development Program is a good example of how to build a more supportive and equitable environment. They focus on shared governance, mental health support, and parent involvement, working together as a team.
Let's talk about achievement itself.
Mhm.
What makes some students succeed and others struggle? We've got extrinsic and intrinsic motivation.
Extrinsic motivation is when you do something because you're going to get a reward or avoid punishment, like studying for a good grade or to avoid getting grounded. Intrinsic motivation is when you do something because you enjoy it or find it interesting. Research shows that intrinsic motivation is way better for deep learning and long-term success.
And having a sense of control, like being able to choose what you learn or how you learn, that seems to boost intrinsic motivation.
Definitely. When students feel like they have some say they're learning, they're more likely to be interested and engaged. Parents and teachers who support this sense of autonomy are doing a great service.
But it's interesting, intrinsic motivation often dips as kids move from elementary to high school. What's up with that?
It's a pattern we see a lot, and it might have to do with how middle and high schools are structured. They're often less personal, more focused on grades and competition, and there's more social comparison. It can shift the focus from the joy of learning to just getting those good grades.
So teachers need to find ways to keep that love of learning alive.
Totally. Extrinsic motivators have their place, but that internal spark, that genuine desire to learn for the sake of learning, that's what we want to nurture.
Okay, now we've got mastery motivation and mindset. These are powerful concepts.
Mastery motivation is all about focusing on learning, understanding, and improving your skills. People with mastery motivation see challenges as opportunities to grow. They have what Carol Dweck calls a growth mindset. That's the belief that your abilities and intelligence aren't fixed. You can develop them with hard work and dedication. On the flip side, there's a helpless orientation. These are people who get overwhelmed by challenges, think they're just not smart enough, and their performance tanks when things get tough. And then there's performance orientation, where the focus is on getting good grades or beating everyone else, not on the learning itself.
Carol Dweck's work on mindset is pretty famous, right? The idea that whether you believe you can grow and learn actually affects how you approach challenges and deal with setbacks.
Yeah, her research shows that mindset matters. People with a growth mindset are more resilient, they persevere, and ultimately they're more successful. They see setbacks as chances to learn and get better. And our mindset is often shaped by how our parents, teachers, and coaches talk to us and treat us. Her Brainology program is designed to teach kids about growth mindset and how the brain can actually change and grow through effort. It's called brain plasticity, and kids seem to really like it.
It's amazing that a growth mindset can actually protect kids from negative stereotypes.
I know, right? Believing you can grow and learn can help you overcome those negative messages that society throws at you.
And then there's self-efficacy, which is basically how much you believe in yourself to succeed.
Yeah, Albert Bandura nailed it with that one. It's your confidence in your ability to handle different situations. Students with high self-efficacy in a subject are more likely to dive in, put in the effort, and not give up when things get hard. Low self-efficacy, on the other hand, can make kids avoid challenges and feel helpless. And it's interesting, parents' self-efficacy can rub off on their kids too.
So believing in yourself really matters. And then we have things like goal setting, planning, and monitoring your progress, those practical skills.
Absolutely. Setting SMART goals, those are specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. That's key. Planning is about managing your time, prioritizing, and staying organized. Self-monitoring is about tracking your progress, seeing what works, and adjusting your approach as needed. Students who do this well, they're called self-regulatory learners. And delaying gratification, putting off those immediate rewards for something bigger down the road, that's a huge predictor of success too.
And grit, that's a big one these days.
Mhm.
It's that passion and perseverance, the stick-to-itness.
Grit is a strong predictor of doing well in school. It's linked to being more engaged in class, succeeding in tougher courses, and having better grades overall. And some things that seem to help build grit are having a purpose in life, practicing mindfulness, and being really committed to your goals.
And we can't forget expectations. It's not just about what students expect of themselves, but what their parents and teachers expect too.
Jacqueline Eccles defines expectations for success as people's beliefs about how well they'll do on a task, compared to their own abilities, other people, and other things they could be doing. It's also about how much they value those goals. Parents who have high expectations for their kids tend to see their kids achieve more academically. But it's important to set high but realistic expectations. Don't lower the bar just to protect their self-esteem. Teachers' expectations matter too. Teachers who believe in their students often provide better instruction, ask more challenging questions, and manage their classrooms better. But teachers need to be aware of their own biases to make sure they're not setting different expectations for different groups of students.
Finally, ethnicity and culture. How do those factors relate to achievement?
It's complicated. Socioeconomic status is often a stronger predictor of achievement than ethnicity.
So it's more about resources and opportunities than race or ethnicity.
Often, yes. When you take into account things like poverty and access to resources, the differences between ethnic groups can shrink. But cultural factors play a role too. When you compare math and science scores internationally, U.S. students often score lower than students in many other countries, especially in East Asia, and that gap tends to widen as they go from elementary school to high school.
Why is that?
Wow.
What are they doing differently in those high-achieving countries?
Harold Stevenson did a lot of research comparing students in the U.S., China, Taiwan, and Japan, and he found that Asian students consistently outperform U.S. students. There are a few reasons for this. Teachers in Asian countries spend more time teaching math specifically. Asian students often have more school days per year. Asian parents tend to have higher expectations and believe that success comes from effort and practice, while some U.S. parents are more likely to think it's about innate ability. Asian students also tend to do more math homework and get more help from their parents.
So it's not just about the kids, it's about the whole culture around education.
Exactly. And it's interesting, research suggests that Asian American students' academic success is largely due to them putting in more effort. Eva Pomerantz has some great advice for parents, she says. Focus on the idea that abilities can change and understand that each kid is different. And in many East Asian cultures, parents are super involved in their kids' learning, starting very early on and continuing through elementary school. They see it as their responsibility to help their kids succeed.
That makes sense. But there's a flip side to that, right? There have been studies of Chinese American immigrant families where those really high expectations and maybe a more authoritarian parenting style led to negative outcomes for kids like aggression, depression, anxiety, and poor social skills.
That's true. And it highlights the importance of finding a balance. There are programs out there teaching Chinese American parents more positive parenting strategies. And even in China, research shows that kids do better with authoritative parenting, which is about being warm and supportive, but also setting clear limits.
So the takeaway is there's no one-size-fits-all approach to parenting or education. It's about finding what works best for each individual child and family, taking into account their culture and background.
Absolutely. And it's about understanding that achievement isn't just about grades or test scores. It's about developing the whole child, their
Mhm.
academic skills, their social and emotional skills, their character, and their resilience.
That's a great point to end on. I'm really struck by how much those early experiences matter. Like, it's not just about learning your ABCs and 123s. It's about setting the stage for how kids approach learning and challenges for their whole lives. And the whole mindset thing, that's really powerful. If we can teach kids to believe in themselves and their ability to grow, that can make a huge difference.
I totally agree. This deep dive has really highlighted the complexity of education, how it's not just about what happens in the classroom, but about all the different factors that shape a child's journey.
So, for you listening, I challenge you to think about your own learning experiences, those early influences, your own mindset. What small change could you make today to unlock a new level of understanding or achievement? This deep dive has given us a lot to think about, and I hope it sparks some new insights and ideas for you. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. It's been a fascinating conversation.